A 68-year-old man walked into Sunday service, sat through his brother's entire sermon about forgiveness and love, waited for the closing prayer, then stood up and shot the pastor 6 times in front of a packed congregation. The pastor was his own brother, the children screaming and diving under pews. They'd known both men their entire lives. The woman who tried to stop the bleeding, she was the killer's sister-in-law. This isn't some random church shooting. This is what happens when a family secret festers for 70 years and explodes in the most sacred space imaginable. But here's what will make your blood boil. The police knew this was going to happen. Family members had warned them, the church had been concerned, and they did absolutely nothing to stop it. What makes this even more infuriating? The motive, everyone believes, might be complete bullshit. If that just made you angry, if you're the kind of person who can't stand it when the system fails innocent people, then smash that subscribe button right now, because every week we expose cases where authorities dropped the ball, where families were ignored, and where the truth is way more twisted than anyone wants to admit. What happened at St. Peter's Missionary Baptist Church in Dayton, Ohio, on February 28, 2016, wasn't just a murder. It was the most calculated act of family revenge ever committed in a house of worship. And the deeper you dig into the school of family history, the more you realize that Daniel didn't just snap. He'd been planning this for months. Tell me in the comments, have you ever had a family member you couldn't stand to be around? Because what you're about to hear will make you question whether you really know the people you grew up with. Pastor William Schooler was everything his community needed him to be. At 70 years old, he'd spent over 30 years building St. Peter's Missionary Baptist Church into the spiritual heart of Dayton's West Side. Former school board member, community leader, the kind of man who officiated your wedding and buried your parents. But here's what made William truly special. He remembered everyone, every grandchild's name, every family struggle, every small victory. When Sandra Williams's husband died suddenly, Pastor Schooler showed up at her house every day for 2 weeks, not to preach, but to sit with her while she cried. When the Johnson family lost their home to foreclosure, he quietly organized the congregation to help them find a new place. That February morning, William arrived at church at 7 a.m. just like he had every Sunday for 3 decades. Coffee in his office, final review of his sermon about forgiveness and redemption, prayers for the families he knew were struggling. He had no idea his own brother was about to make him the victim of his final sermon. What's your relationship like with your siblings? Because the Schooler brothers grew up in the same house, attended the same church, shared the same parents. But somewhere along the way, love turned to hatred so intense that it ended in execution. Daniel Schooler had spent 68 years being the other brother. While William commanded respect from the pulpit, Daniel worked construction, lived quietly, and watched his younger brother receive all the love, attention, and admiration that he felt should have been his. But here's what the media got wrong. This wasn't just about jealousy. This was about money, control, and a family secret that had been destroying Daniel from the inside for decades. Court documents revealed that Daniel believed William was stealing from their family trust, but family members paint a different picture. They say Daniel had been demanding money from William for years, claiming their parents had promised him inheritance that never materialized. The truth? Their parents had died years earlier, leaving William as the executor of their modest estate. Daniel was convinced his brother was hiding assets, manipulating legal documents, and deliberately keeping him in poverty while living comfortably as a respected community leader. Here's what I want you to think about. If you believed your own family was stealing from you, if you thought your brother was ruining your life while everyone praised him as a saint, how far would you go to get what you thought was rightfully yours? This is where the story gets truly infuriating. Because Daniel Schooler didn't just snap. He'd been escalating for months and multiple people saw it coming. Family members later admitted they'd been worried about Daniel's behavior for over a year. He'd been making threats, showing up at William's house uninvited, and talking obsessively about getting what was owed to him. Patricia Schooler, Daniel's niece, told investigators that Daniel had specifically said he was going to make William pay and that everyone would see what kind of man he really was. She thought he meant a lawsuit. She never imagined he meant murder. Church members had noticed Daniel attending services more frequently in the weeks before the shooting, not out of renewed faith, but to watch his brother, to study his routines, to plan his revenge. The most chilling detail: Daniel had been carrying a gun to church for 3 weeks before he used it. 3 weeks of sitting in the pews, listening to his brother preach about love and forgiveness while planning his execution. What kind of person sits through sermons about forgiveness while planning murder? What level of hatred does it take to plot your brother's death in the house where you both learned to pray? February 28, 2016 started like any other Sunday at St. Peter's. Families filed into the sanctuary, children squirmed in their seats, and Pastor William Schooler took his place behind the pulpit he'd occupied for over 30 years. His sermon that morning was about redemption and second chances, about how God's love could heal even the deepest wounds, about forgiveness being the pathway to peace. Daniel sat in the back, like he had for weeks, listening to every word, but instead of finding peace, he was making his final preparations. When William finished his sermon and called for the closing prayer, Daniel stood up. Church members thought he was leaving early. Daniel had never been particularly religious, and it wouldn't have been unusual for him to skip the final hymn. But Daniel didn't head for the door. He walked down the center aisle toward the pulpit where his brother stood. William looked up, probably expecting Daniel to ask him something, maybe even hoping this was Daniel's moment of reconciliation. Instead, Daniel pulled out a .38 caliber handgun and fired 6 shots at point-blank range. The congregation erupted in screams. Children dove under pews. Adults ran for the exits. But some people, the bravest people you'll ever hear about, rushed toward the gunfire to help. Patricia Johnson, a nurse in the congregation, ran to William despite the chaos around her. She tried desperately to stop the bleeding, to save the man who had baptized her children and married her daughter. But William Schooler was already gone. The man who had spent his life preaching about love and forgiveness had been murdered by his own brother in front of the people who loved him most. I want you to imagine being in that church. Imagine if this was your pastor, your spiritual leader, the man you trusted with your deepest fears and greatest joys. Imagine watching him die while his killer, his own brother, stood over his body without a trace of remorse. Daniel Schooler didn't run. He didn't try to escape. He walked outside, sat on the church steps, and waited for police to arrive. When Officer Michael Harrison approached him, Daniel's first words were, "I shot my brother. He had it coming." No remorse, no explanation, just cold, calculated satisfaction that he'd finally gotten his revenge. During his arrest, Daniel told multiple officers that William deserved what he got and that he was tired of being cheated. He showed no emotion, no regret, no recognition of the horror he'd just inflicted on dozens of innocent people. What kind of person feels satisfaction after murdering their brother in front of children? What level of hatred allows someone to destroy an entire community's sense of safety and peace? Here's where this case gets truly frustrating, because despite having dozens of witnesses, a clear motive, and a confession, investigators never dug deeper into the family dynamics that led to this tragedy. The Montgomery County Sheriff's Office treated this as a straightforward domestic dispute. Man shoots brother over money, case closed. But they never investigated whether Daniel's claims about the inheritance had any merit. They never explored the deeper family history that might have explained why 2 brothers who grew up loving each other ended up in such a destructive cycle. Family members begged investigators to look into Daniel's mental health history, his financial situation, his increasingly erratic behavior over the past year. But because Daniel had confessed and the case seemed solved, they didn't pursue these leads. This is what happens when investigators take the easy route instead of seeking the truth. They got a conviction, but they never got answers. And without answers, how can we prevent this from happening to another family? Daniel Schooler's trial began in October 2016, 8 months after the shooting. His defense team argued that he was suffering from mental illness, that years of perceived betrayal had driven him to a psychotic break. But the prosecution painted a different picture. This was cold-blooded murder, planned and executed with full awareness of the consequences. The most heartbreaking testimony came from William's family. His widow, Dorothy, described how her husband had tried for years to help Daniel, lending him money, offering him work, inviting him to family gatherings despite his increasingly hostile behavior. William never gave up on Daniel, Dorothy testified. Even when Daniel was saying terrible things about him, William would say, "He's my brother. He's hurting. I have to keep trying to reach him." The prosecution presented evidence that Daniel had been planning this for months, purchasing the gun, practicing at a shooting range, and stalking his brother's routines. This wasn't a moment of madness. This was premeditated murder. Think about that. William spent his final months trying to save the very brother who was planning to kill him. How do you reconcile that kind of love with that kind of hatred? On November 15, 2016, Daniel Schooler was found guilty of aggravated murder and sentenced to 27 years to life in prison. At 68 years old, it was essentially a death sentence. But the conviction didn't bring closure to the community. Church members struggled to return to worship in the same sanctuary where their pastor had been murdered. Children who witnessed the shooting suffered from nightmares and anxiety. Families questioned whether they'd ever feel safe in their house of worship again. The most tragic victim, besides William himself, was the church community. St. Peter's had been a place of refuge, healing, and hope. Daniel's actions didn't just kill his brother, they destroyed the spiritual home of hundreds of families. This is what murder really does. It doesn't just destroy the victim. It shatters every life that person touched, every community they served, every future they were supposed to be part of. Today, Daniel Schooler sits in Chillicothe Correctional Institution, serving his sentence. He's now 76 years old, and by all accounts, he's never expressed remorse for his actions. But the questions that drove him to murder remain unanswered. Was there really money missing from the family trust? Was William actually manipulating their parents' estate? Or was Daniel's rage built on delusions and decades of misplaced resentment? The family inheritance that Daniel was so desperate to claim turned out to be worth less than $50,000. He destroyed his life, his brother's life, and an entire community's peace of mind for what amounted to a modest savings account. What detail in this case bothers you the most? The fact that Daniel planned this for months, that he showed no remorse, that he destroyed a church community over $50,000. Let me know in the comments. I want to hear which part of this story affected you most. St. Peter's Missionary Baptist Church could have closed after the shooting. Many congregations wouldn't have survived such trauma, but under the leadership of interim pastor Robert Mitchell, the community chose to heal together. They held memorial services for William, not just to mourn his death, but to celebrate the life he'd lived and the love he'd shared. They created a scholarship fund in his name. They continued the community outreach programs he'd started. Most importantly, they chose forgiveness, not for Daniel, but for themselves. They refused to let his hatred poison their hearts or destroy their faith. This is what resilience looks like. A community that chooses love over hatred, healing over revenge, hope over despair. In a world full of Daniel Schoolers, we need more people like the members of St. Peter's. Pastor William Schooler's murder was senseless, tragic, and entirely preventable. But his legacy lives on in every life he touched, every family he helped, every person he taught to find hope in the darkest moments. Daniel Schooler thought he was getting revenge. Instead, he guaranteed that his brother would be remembered as a martyr while he would be forgotten as a killer. The man who preached about forgiveness was murdered by someone who couldn't forgive. The man who dedicated his life to bringing people together was killed by someone consumed with division. The man who believed in redemption was destroyed by someone who chose damnation. If you believe that love is stronger than hatred, that community is more powerful than revenge, that hope can overcome even the darkest evil, then you understand why Pastor William Schooler's story matters. While Daniel Schooler will likely die in prison, the questions surrounding his motives continue to haunt the Dayton community. Was this really about money, or was there something deeper? Something more twisted that drove him to such extreme violence? Some family members still believe there were secrets about their parents' relationship, about childhood trauma, about incidents that shaped both brothers but affected them differently. But Daniel has never talked, never explained, never provided the closure that might help people understand how two brothers who grew up loving each other could end up in such a destructive cycle. What do you think really drove Daniel to murder? Was it just greed and jealousy, or was there something darker in the Schooler family history? Share your theories in the comments. Sometimes the perspective of people outside the situation can reveal truths that those closest to it can't see. The search for answers continues, and hope never dies. If unsolved mysteries like this move you, stories of family betrayal, communities that refuse to give up, and the belief that truth will eventually surface, then you're exactly where you belong. Hit that like button if this story made you feel something and you believe answers are still out there. And listen, if you're not subscribed yet, what are you waiting for? Every single week, we dive deep into cases that law enforcement gave up on, stories that mainstream media won't touch, and mysteries that deserve answers. Your subscription literally helps us investigate more cases, reach more families, and maybe, just maybe, help solve these crimes. We're not just telling stories here. We're fighting for justice one case at a time. Subscribe right now and join our growing army of truth seekers who refuse to let these cases die in forgotten file cabinets. Hit that notification bell because you won't want to miss what we uncover next. Some of these revelations will absolutely blow your mind. And please, share this with someone who needs to hear it, someone who might hold a piece of the puzzle. What detail in this case bothered you the most? What do you think investigators should have done differently? Do you have theories about what really happened? Let us know in the comments below. Your perspective might be exactly what's needed to crack this case. Do you have information about the Schooler family history or the events leading up to this tragedy? Don't hesitate to contact the Montgomery County Sheriff's Office. Even the smallest detail could provide the closure this community still needs. What family mystery should we explore next? Let us know in the comments below. Until next time, remember, the search for answers continues, and every family deserves the truth. If you or someone you know has information about the Schooler family or the events leading up to this tragedy, please contact the Montgomery County Sheriff's Office at 937-225-4357. Your call could bring a family the closure they've been waiting for.